Okay, we are now in Module 6. Module 6 is actually a brand new unit. We're in Unit 3, and Unit 3 has Module 6, Module 7, and Module 8. Module 6 is called Representing Ratios and Rates. The first lesson in Module 6 is called Ratios. And the goal is that you will be able to use ratios to compare two quantities. So again, this is Module 6, Representing Ratios and Rates. It's the first module in the third unit. It's a brand new topic. The topic is proportionality, ratios, and rates. Okay? The first thing we're going to do in lesson 1 of Module 6 is learn what are ratios. This lesson is called Ratios. 6.1 is called Ratios. Okay? So you have your vocabulary page, and then we go to 6.1. 6.1 is called ratios. So in this lesson, you're going to learn what ratios are. And so let's just start by writing a definition. A ratio, and that's how you say that, ratio. It's not ratio, it's ratio. A ratio is a comparison of two quantities. A quantity is an amount of something, okay? So when you have an amount of something, you might have like 10 shoes. You might have 5 students. You might have 3 sandwiches, right? It's an amount of something, okay? So a ratio is a comparison of two quantities or two amounts. And there are 3 ways to write ratios, okay? And we're going to look at that first. Just how do you write ratios, okay? So in my class, there are 14 girls and 10 boys. And we're going to use this example to show the 3 ways that you can write a ratio. And remember, we're comparing quantities. And the quantity of girls, or the amount of girls, is 14. And the quantity of boys, or the amount of boys, is 10. We're going to compare those by writing a ratio. Here's the 3 ways to write ratios. First, you can just write, we're going to compare girls to boys. So you could write 14 to 10. That is one way to write a ratio. Just write the word 2, okay? The next way is to use a colon. Okay? You use colons in language arts when you write, but you also use them in math, and we use colons to write ratios. A colon looks like this: 14 to 10. And that's how you say it, 14 to 10. All right? So you can actually write the word 2, or you can write a colon. The last way you can write a ratio is like a fraction. So ratios can look like fractions. And you would do that by going 14 girls to 10 boys. So ratios can look a lot like fractions, and they can even act a lot like fractions. But instead of being part of a whole, like breaking something up into pieces, which is what you do with fractions, like you would take a whole pizza and you would cut it into pieces, that's what fractions are, right? Pieces of a whole. Ratios are a comparison of 2 different quantities. So it's like 14 girls to 10 boys. You're comparing those 2 quantities or those 2 amounts of something, all right? Now let's compare the boys to the girls. Now you might be wondering, what's the difference? We compared the girls to the boys over here. Here we're going to compare the boys to the girls. The boys are going to come first. So that would look like this: 10 boys to 14 girls, okay? Or we could write 10 boys to 14 girls. Or we could write 10 boys to 14 girls. Okay, 3 ways to write a ratio. All of these are ratios, comparing 2 quantities. The quantity of girls compared to the quantity of boys, or the quantity of boys compared to the quantity of girls. All right, last, we're going to compare girls to total, which means we have to find the total. So how many total students are there? If there are 14 girls and 10 boys, 14 plus 10, there are 24 total students. Okay, 24 total students. So now we can compare the girls to the total. And that would look like this. There are 14 girls to 24 total students. Or 14 girls to 24 total students. Or you would write 14 girls to 24 total students. All right, 3 ways that you can write ratios. All right, let's go on to what equivalent ratios are. Equivalent ratios are a lot like equivalent fractions, which we've talked about a little bit. Equivalent, the word equivalent means having the same value. Okay, so that means if it has the same value, it represents basically the same amount. Okay, so equivalent ratios are ratios that describe the same amount or the same comparison. All right, to find equivalent ratios, you either multiply or divide both terms of a ratio by the same number. The terms are the top number on the bottom number. In fractions, we call the top number a numerator, and we call the bottom number a denominator. With ratios, we call it the top term and the bottom term. Okay, so find equivalent ratios by multiplying. If we're comparing a number of dogs to a number of cats, there are 4 dogs to 3 cats. That means for every 4 dogs, there are 3 cats. Okay, so 4 dogs, 3 cats, 4 dogs, 3 cats. But we can find equivalent ratios by multiplying both the top and the bottom by the same number. So let's start out by multiplying them by 2. 4 times 2 is 8. 3 times 2 is 6. Those are equivalent ratios. That's still a ratio of 4 dogs to 3 cats. For every 4 dogs, there are 3 cats. Let's multiply by 3. We take 3 and multiply it times the 4, okay? 3 times 4 is 12. 3 times 3 is 9, okay? Again, that is an equivalent ratio. That's still for every 4 dogs, there are 3 cats, right? For every 4 dogs, there are 3 cats, okay? We can multiply times 4, and we're always multiplying back to the original ratio, right? We're multiplying back to the original ratio. So 4 times 4 is 16. 4 times 3 is 12. That's still a ratio of 4 dogs for every 3 cats. Okay, they're equivalent ratios. Still 4 dogs for every 3 cats. Equivalent ratios, okay? Another way to find equivalent ratios is to divide both the top term and the bottom term by the same number. So you could also do it by dividing. If we have 14 girls to 10 boys, we could divide both terms by 2. 2 is a common factor for 14 and 10. That would mean we would have 7 to 5, because 14 divided by 2 is 7, and 10 divided by 2 is 5. So those are also equivalent ratios. So for every 7 girls, there are 5 boys. Okay, in this case, for every 7 girls, there are 5 boys. Okay, they're equivalent ratios. All right, so in this lesson, we learned what ratio means. It's a comparison of 2 quantities, and there are 3 ways to write ratios, and we can find equivalent ratios by multiplying both the top and bottom terms by the same number, or we can divide both the bottom and top terms by the same number, meaning those 2 numbers have to have a common factor, and then we can divide by that common factor, and that will give us equivalent ratios. Okay, 2 things you learned today. What are ratios? Or actually 3 things you learned. What are ratios? How do you write them? And what are equivalent ratios? And how do you find them? Okay? Lesson 6.1.